So I'm just a little worried that the technology piece will trade that authentic thing, that authentic messy thing, for something a little too slick. And then we're doing what the healthcare system does, which is sort of overly reduce people's experiences, overly package them, and then pieces of ourselves get left out. And those pieces that get left out tend to be really, really important.
This is Faye from Feisworld Media. In this video, I'm inviting a longtime, very special guest, Dr. BJ Miller, to join me and talk to you guys about telefunerals and telememorials. That's right, those terms do exist today. Given COVID, there are a lot of funerals and memorials are now hosted on Zoom, virtual reality platforms, live streaming. Because some of my Zoom videos have gotten really popular here on YouTube, I have gotten a lot of requests and questions about how to make it into the ultimate funeral memorial, make it the best experience possible for everyone. I was under a lot of pressure answering those questions because I'm not an expert in medicine or palliative care or end-of-life care, so I really didn't know how to respond to that. This video is not sponsored, but I want to give a huge shout out to Mental Health, which is BJ's company, and all the counselors who is helping people like myself, caregivers, patients, social workers, doctors, and beyond, a way to connect, to learn about death, illness, and disability. If you're thinking about hosting a funeral or a memorial for a loved one, and you may be using Zoom, for instance, something that you feel like you can manage, a lot of the basics I've been teaching on this channel will still help you, such as having a rehearsal, planning for an agenda, thinking about the transitions from one speaker to another. Some of you guys might even hire for performers as well, and it's always a good idea to have a backup plan if needed. So all these things still stand true. But the real challenge is that I understand for you as the event organizer, and for me as someone who has supported several Zoom memorials and funerals, there's a lot of pressure. There are a lot of people in the room, some people you haven't even met, people you haven't seen for a long time. How do you actually create a good experience? As it turned out, that's exactly what this conversation is all about. I want to be transparent with you guys. So BJ here shared a lot of hidden gems and things that you and I are not thinking about, but are crucial and perhaps some of the most important things for not only the memorials, the funerals, but for life in general. And I learned so much, and I want to share this moment with you. And thank you for your trust in having us talk about such a sensitive subject, but I think it's something that we absolutely need to surface to the top. For those of you who are not as familiar with BJ Miller's work, he has practiced and taught in all major settings: home, hospital, clinic, and residential care facility. In his work, he draws upon his personal experiences with disability and his undergraduate studies in art history as much as his medical education. BJ speaks internationally on the themes of living well in the face of illness and death. He has been profiled in the New York Times, interviewed by Oprah, Tim Ferriss, and Krista Tippett, and co-authored the book, A Beginner's Guide to the End. What are your thoughts on what actually is important? What do people, as in the attendees, the different roles that are involved, what do the attendees need to see and witness? How do we make them feel that they're really part of this? And then how do we drive the emotions where you're literally looking at a flat screen? All that.
And so, okay, just make sure I'm hearing your question right. This is specific to virtual funerals, virtual memorials, right? This is work, right? Okay. And I was looking through those links. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I at least clicked through the links you sent, just kind of eyeballed what I was looking at. So, well, I'll circle back to that for a second. But in answer to your question, what do people need? Well, one of the reasons why I think this is a challenging question is different people need different things, and any one person needs different things depending where they are in the grief spectrum or how close they were to the deceased. So at least in my novice point of view, not being in that industry, but being around the subject a lot, one answer is that you need multiple on-ramps for people. You know, there isn't one way that's going to serve every person. So that's one thought. Whether it's telehealth or digital or telefunerals, that's the word, telememorials, I think there's so much great potential here, not just potential, it's happening. But I think two things. One is we should be really careful to not confuse the digital space with the analog space.
Mm-hmm.
The differences, like we were talking a moment ago, vis-a-vis our sort of own lives, it's the digital space is amazing, but don't pretend it's the same thing as being in person. Some, that's where I think I see people get in a little trouble saying, oh, it's the same thing, or it's just as good, or something like, well, no, if you're really paying attention, it's importantly different. The digital space and the in-person analog space, each has their own power, each has something to offer, but they're not the same thing. So one way and another, I just yearn for digital companies to at least somehow nod to that fact and not because it feels like a sales job. No, this is just as good as an in-person funeral. It's the same. No, no, it's not quite. It may be just as good by some metric, but it's different. So one thing is I just feel the need for people to be a little bit transparent and to acknowledge the differences somewhere in the materials somewhere. So that's one thought as I was looking through those sites, because otherwise, technology can be so compelling and we get so excited and we forget all the unintended consequences, that come from technology stuff and all the things that get left out, the people who get left out. So that seduction around technology, I'm begging that everybody who's doing this sort of funeral work note somehow that this is different. One of the problems around death, illness, disability, all the things we've talked about many times together is it's messy, and the body is a messy thing. It's a smelly thing. It makes sounds and stuff. It secretes stuff, we're messy. And that's not a problem. That's to be celebrated. At least those of us who are in the business of supporting people. We need to celebrate all that subtle, intricate, fleshy stuff somewhere. And death is so scary to some people and so messy to some people that I worry that the digital space, in the effort to serve more people, to be a great product, is going to get a little too slick and play into, accidentally or otherwise, play into our flight from nature, our flight from the messier version of reality. And especially when it comes to memorializing someone, hey, everyone, there are different cultural approaches, individual approaches, but for my money, what's really therapeutic is that that funerals is a moment for real honesty, honest emotions, messy emotions, mixed emotions. Most people are on some level are happy the person who died is gone on some level, if they're honest, that person used to drive them crazy, or they're running out of money to pay for that person to do something, one way or another. There are a lot of complex emotions and feelings that come up. And so what I'd hate to happen, and that the funeral can be this great excuse to be very real. This is something that happened that it was sad and hard and wow. So I'm just a little worried that the technology piece will trade that authentic thing, that authentic messy thing, for something a little too slick. And then we're doing what the healthcare system does, which is sort of overly reduce people's experiences, overly package them. And then pieces of ourselves get left out. And those pieces that get left out tend to be really, really important. And if we're not tending to those things carefully, a funeral service can leave people, even it can be beautiful, but then can feel a little hollow or something's missing. So anyway, let me just pause there. Am I making sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because one of the things I kind of reemphasize for, a couple of clients I work with, or even in conversations with prospects, or I don't even think it was very weird for me to even think of that experience as a business. It's more like people reaching out to me and trying to help. And what I remember emphasizing the fact that don't worry about Zoom so much. Like, worry about Zoom, which setting to turn on. Yeah, if you can improve your video quality and sound quality, great. If you happen to be a host. But beyond that, people are so caught up in what if I make a mistake? I help them a little bit with transitions, but that's it. don't think that's what really matters. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd say I'd go so far as to say I'd almost welcome the mistakes, because those, and this happens with me and clients, is
Yeah.
the glitch, or when the cat shits, behind you, whatever. Those are that sort of, reality is awkward. It's
Mm,
funny, it's goofy, it's stinky. So those little moments, I almost look for these what feel like mistakes as
mm,
ways to sort of claim
mhm,
something a little bit more authentic than what social media or the digital space tends to do, which is it, picks out the pretty part of you and just puts that forward.
mm,
And so mistakes are a problem. So what I think we're talking about here is life is not just these is more than just problems, that this is part of the majesty of life, that these mistakes are to be celebrated, that's those mistakes are opportunities to prove the authenticity
mm,
of the
mm,
moment, because we're human beings, and because this technology, it advances much faster than our moral or aesthetic or
mm.
emotional selves. So this technology is making things possible that we can't emotionally keep up with, I think, is part of the answer. That's why we make sort of basic mistakes. We're
Why
not
are
mature
we,
enough.
why do you think we are much slower at the emotional and aesthetics level? Is because of the singularity theory with the technology hasn't really reached that point, but why are we so slow in the other
I just
things?
think it's probably, you could just chalk it up to the way we're wired, our nervous systems, and the way our neuroplasticity, the way our nervous systems adapt to reality.
Mm,
It doesn't, it takes days, weeks, months for nerves to shift. It's not an instantaneous thing.
mm,
So I think it's just back to one way to answer your question would be just the vagaries of a bodily life. It's more complicated and generally slower than what's possible in the ones and zeros of digital space. I think
mm,
that's the answer enough. Then throw in there some of our fears around change and our fears around the messy parts of life, and that's another thing that kind of puts a distance, that wedges us between the digital and the analog, or our emotional or analytical selves.
mm.
But those are my two answers for you.
Oh, yay! Post production. No, I'm gonna keep that part in. So that's
Exactly. Keep it in. It's
see.
authentic.